Is the war on terror really a war? What is a war? A war is a major armed conflict between states and nations with the purpose of conquering or taking over the government or defending a government or country. In other words, the survival of the country is at stake in a war. For example, in the American Revolutionary War, the king wanted to impose a monarchy on the colonies. The colonists wanted to have a constitutional republic. That is the conflict. It's major armed conflict between states with a certain purpose, the purpose of taking over the government to impose the law that they want. Now, in the Nazi case, for example, World War II, it's clear that that was a war. World War II was a war. Why? Because Hitler wanted to impose Nazism on Poland, Holland, Belgium, France, any other country he could get under his thumb. They were fighting armed conflict between nations and states for the survival of the country. So when they invaded Poland, they took over Poland and they imposed Nazism. That's a war. Now, is the war on poverty a war? Well, is there a major armed conflict between states? Is the purpose to take over the government? No. There is no war in the war on poverty. They use the word war is being used metaphorically. It's being used to gin up support for, in this case, a governmental effort to reduce or eradicate something they think is bad, which is poverty, which is bad. That is a totally different sense of the use of the word war. So the war on crime, for example, it involves armed conflict, but it's not major because it's not between states and nations. And the purpose of the warring parties is not to take over the government and impose a different kind of law or government. The purpose is, in the case of the American common criminal, it could be to make money or revenge or whatever their motivation is. But the survival of the country is not at stake in this case. So, which of the two meanings, the metaphoric or the primary meaning, is the word war on terror referring to? Well, it seems pretty clear to me, but if it's not clear, of course, look at the essentials. Are the terrorists a state or nation? No. Do they have the means to impose their law, Sharia law, on American citizens? Do they have the army, the navy, the air force? Can they invade us? Obviously not. Did Muslims have such power at one time in history? Yeah. In the Middle Ages, they had a state that was so strong that it took over all of North Africa and half of Spain. And they were stopped by the Christians halfway through Spain. Those were wars because those were nations and they had the means to conquer another territory and impose their law. But now the terrorists don't have the power. What is the real motivation of the terrorists? Why do they attack us? Well, I explained that in the video on the truth about terrorism. Their purpose is to get us to change our public policy. Which one? The foreign policy of intervening in Arab states. And why? Because they want to get us out so they can impose theocracies like they have in Iran in other Arab countries. So first they have to get us out, and then they have a chance to overthrow the monarchs or other tyrants that are in the various countries that they want to overthrow. That's their motivation. They know they don't have the means to take over the United States. They don't have the army or the navy, and they can't conquer us. And they don't have the intention either, and they know that. So it's not really a war. It's just, in a metaphoric sense, a war. So in the case of the war on crime, for example, these criminals are in armed conflict with the United States? No. With other gangs? Yes. With the enforcement people in the United States? Yes, the police. But it's not a major conflict between states, so it's not really a war. The war on crime is just metaphorically a war. What does it mean metaphorically? It means a war in the sense of something bad that the government wants to reduce or eradicate. So they call it a war so they can motivate the people, so they can get more resources and more willingness of the people to contribute to the effort of eradicating or reducing this social evil. So that's part one. We're going to do part two in a minute, where we're going to cover how is it that the politicians put this epistemological sleight of hand over us, how they convince us that the war on terror is really a war, when it's obviously not in the primary sense, why they do it, what are the consequences. So we'll be right back.